All right, it is 7 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here and spending your Thursday evening with us. My name is Kaylee Zazula, and I am the program manager for Travis Audubon. And before we get started on our presentation and why you're here, I'm just going to give a couple of programmatic updates that you should be aware of. So a couple of things that are happening soon. A brand new event that has been posted to the calendar is happening during the Super Bowl weekend. It is called the Superb Owl. And this brand new event is going to be basically a competition to see who can see the most birds in a big day. And so you can register and you can pick one 24-hour period during that weekend, and you submit your eBird list, and we basically crown the winner of whoever sees the most species, and the winner gets a $100 gift card to HEB. So I'll put the link to more info in the chat box in just a minute, but I hope that y'all choose to participate. It should be really fun. We also have a couple of international trips coming up with our partner Mowgli Expeditions. There are going to be a couple of sessions of the trip to Belize in February, which is coming up very soon. So there is still space. And if you are interested in getting away next month, then Belize is a great option. And then with Mowgli Expeditions in April, there's going to be a trip to Costa Rica. And the bird guide is going to be Juan Diego. You may know him from a previous speaker series. And then he also did the virtual birding in Costa Rica in 2020 and 2021. So that's another great option for international travel. And then in February, our Catio tour is also happening. We have kind of started doing it every 2 years, so we haven't had one since 2022. And so if you have a cat and you're interested in learning about catios, which are basically outdoor cat patios, then we recommend you go on this tour. You can go to as many or as few of the catios around Austin as you like. We basically give you a map, and it's a self-guided tour that's happening February 24th. So once again, I'll just put some information in the chat box to that event. And so that's just a summary of some of the big things happening soon. I'll go ahead and pass it over to John Bloomfield, our board president, to introduce our speaker. So take it away, John.
Hey, good night, good evening, everybody. Welcome to what I think is going to be a terrific talk tonight. I'm always excited when we're discussing shorebirds, and I'm doubly excited when we talk about shorebirds and spring migration, particularly with the weather that we've enjoyed over the last couple of days. Any thoughts of spring and spending some time on the Texas coast are really, really welcome. So our speaker tonight is Sam Wolfe, a shorebird biologist with Manomet, which many of you know is one of the premier nonprofit groups that focus on international shorebird research and conservation. Sam has a master's degree in range and wildlife management from Texas A&M. She lives in Rockport, and we're very lucky to have her. Just a little side note. Many of you know that we do a monthly bird survey at Hornsby Bend, and the shorebird component of that, we actually report those numbers to Manomet, where it gets rolled up into the International Shorebird Survey database. And there are, Sam, you could, I don't, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of sites contributing to that database, and it's cool to have Travis Audubon be part of that. Because I think research on inland shorebirds is probably lagging behind what people find along the coast. So Sam had the opportunity to visit with us on that ISS survey, a few months ago, and we loved having her, and we love having her tonight. So I'll turn it over without further ado.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that. Let me share my screen. Okay, awesome. Well, thanks for that introduction. I did have a great time at Hornsby Bend. I was just telling Kaylee that I had low expectations for a water treatment site, but was pleasantly surprised. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, I want you to hear this and see it. I don't know what to do. This is, huh?
Sorry about that. You can continue talking.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. So, yes, I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you so much for the invitation. Let's see. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background on me, since I do have some close ties to the Texas Hill Country. I'm originally from Illinois, but fieldwork has taken me all over the place, country and world. And one of those jobs brought me to Killeen, Texas to work with black-capped vireos. And I really fell in love with the habitat and Texas in general. And that was by far one of my favorite jobs. And so Central Texas will always be near and dear to my heart for that reason. My biggest interest has always been bird migration. Like John said, it's been pretty rough few last days with this cold snap. So thinking about bird migration is pretty exciting. And to this day, I haven't found anything that gets me so excited as thinking about or watching migrants who have just flown across the Gulf of Mexico and landed on the Texas coast, feeding in huge concentrations, whether that be songbirds, shorebirds, or even raptors. Migration is truly a spectacle, and in some ways, there's a lot that we still don't know about it. So it makes it that much more fascinating to me. This is a quick introduction to Manomet for anyone who's not familiar with us. We are a nonprofit based out of Massachusetts, and we focus on shorebird research and conservation. We have staff located across the entire Western Hemisphere, and here in North America, I represent Texas, and we also have staff in Georgia, Maine, and of course, Massachusetts. And we're also spread across Latin American countries like Uruguay, Nicaragua, Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico, to name a few. As you know, shorebirds travel across entire continents, so that's why it's important that we work across borders at the flyway scale. And something that I really appreciate about Manomet is that we work with farmers and ranchers in a lot of these places, which helps break barriers that can exist between conservation groups and producers. So just to get started with shorebirds, I wanted to make sure everyone here knows what a shorebird is exactly. The name is a bit of a misnomer. Shorebirds reside in a variety of habitats, including inland, so not just the shore. They're grouped based on genetic relationships. So sandpipers, plovers, phalaropes, and curlews are all closely related, and collectively we call them shorebirds. So things like egrets and herons and even skimmers are not technically a shorebird. A lot of shorebirds are long distance migrants, and some species travel thousands of miles twice each year. So pretty impressive migratory patterns. And here in Texas, you can see somewhere on the order of 30 species of shorebirds. The shorebird we're going to be talking about today is the Whimbrel. So I just wanted to give you a quick background on them. They are related to long-billed curlews, which you may be familiar with. So they are large-bodied birds with a curved bill, though not as curved and as long as the long-billed curlew. And they have these racing stripes on the side of, through the top of their head and through the eyes. And in flight, they have this distinct football shape to their body and very strong wings. Whimbrel travel very long distances every spring and fall. So they winter in Brazil and breed in the Arctic. And the population of Whimbrel that we're interested in here in Texas is the Mackenzie population. So they breed in the Mackenzie River Delta up on the northern slope of Alaska. And so this map kind of shows you a loop migration pattern that Whimbrel utilize. So the blue represents northbound spring migration, and the pink represents southbound fall migration. So you can see after they leave Brazil in the spring, they're flying across the Gulf of Mexico, landing in Texas. They'll stay there about a month to refuel and rest. And then they start going up through the mid-continent, stopping at various sites until they get to their breeding grounds. And then in the fall, they take an easterly route, stopping over at Hudson Bay and the East Coast before then jumping across the Atlantic Ocean. So a lot of people ask why they do this sort of loop migration. Why would they take one path in the spring and another path in the fall? Basically, they are taking advantage of wind patterns, the seasonal winds. At least that's what we believe. Shorebirds can't soar, so they're continuously flapping during migration, and that expends huge amounts of energy, as you can imagine. So they really need a tailwind to help them get somewhere quickly. So this map of winds on the right kind of helps explain it a bit. I'm not an expert on wind patterns, but a lot of times if a bird is doing something weird with their movements, we can usually tie that to some kind of phenomenon that's happening with the weather. And so you can see that if they were to take the same path south in the fall, meaning going through the mid-continent, they would experience headwind almost the entire time, and that would not get them there safely or quickly. And I did want to mention that this range map was developed in part by older technology satellite tracking. It only transmitted locations once a day, so it kind of gave us this broad stroke, crude movement estimates of what they were doing. So keep that in mind as we start talking about the newer technology tags that we're using now. Now, because Whimbrels travel across these great distances, they're utilizing a variety of different habitats, usually open landscapes like the tundra on the breeding grounds, marsh and agriculture, which you might see them in here in Texas. But something that might surprise you is that in Latin America, they'll utilize mangrove forests. So that picture on the left is showing a Whimbrel hanging out in this dark mangrove. And then as you can imagine, as their habitat changes, so does their diet. That long curved bill is perfectly designed to reach down into burrows. So some key prey items that they like are fiddler crabs and crawfish, and even wolf spiders who use burrows. And they'll also eat berries. Now, the reason we focus on Whimbrel research is that along with many other shorebird species, they're suffering global population declines. And this recent paper talks about just that. It shows all the different shorebird species and how they are declining. And the main takeaway from that paper was that they're declining, but that decline is actually accelerating. So pretty dire situation for shorebirds. And Whimbrel in particular are vulnerable because of their adaptation to specific food resources. So we talked about how they're somewhat flexible in their diet, but with that really long curved bill, there's only so much they can do to adapt. They also depend on coastal habitats during certain parts of their life cycle. And because humans also like the coast, habitat is going away due to development or human disturbance, which provides functional habitat loss. And finally, they do experience hunting in the Caribbean islands and South America. So I wanted to mention, kind of discuss the hunting aspect a little bit because it's something that is likely affecting Whimbrel, but that we still don't know a lot about. So in places like Guyana, they use this hunting technique called shocking, which uses a wire to hunt the birds, and they also shoot the birds. And many hunters do this for subsistence, meaning that they themselves are consuming the meat, and others will sell it at the market. And researchers found that the birds sold at the markets reflected the species composition that they were seeing out in the field during their shorebird surveys, including Whimbrel. So taking a look at that picture of the meat, those larger birds at the top could very well be Whimbrel or other large shorebirds. So that was kind of a downer slide, but the good news is we have a few different tools that we can use to conserve shorebirds. We just got funding to kick off a 3-year Whimbrel initiative in which we'll have a working group of people from all different organizations focusing on actively conserving Whimbrel. And we also work on some other things that are listed here, which include hosting workshops for site managers, and we also do landowner engagement. And those things really help give us a more well-rounded idea of what actions we need to take to conserve the birds and what actions are feasible to implement. The International Shorebird Survey, which John mentioned, also plays a role in conservation of shorebirds, as well as the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network, which we call WISRN, the acronym. And we will touch on those two things later if we have time. But today's talk, I wanted to focus on the science aspect of shorebird conservation. Science has to be part of the equation here so that we are completely informed about what exactly is causing those declines so that we know what action to take. Okay, so those Whimbrel tracks that I mentioned before didn't give us very detailed movement information, but they did guide us to the upper Texas coast as an important stopover site in the spring. So this area includes High Island, which you may have heard of, and Boulevard Peninsula, north to the town of Winnie, and then all of that agricultural land in between. In 2021, we started looking for Whimbrel in that area to understand their use of the stopover site during spring. And so from here on out, we're going to be focusing on this area and talking about Whimbrel use of it. In order to learn more about how Whimbrel are using this area, we use GPS tracking technology. Specifically, we use an Ornatella tag, which weighs 9 grams. We were able to successfully trap a total of 38 Whimbrel over the last 2 springs. We use, again, a newer technology that has the ability to record very accurate location data as frequently as every second if we wanted it to, but of course that would be too much information and data to deal with. So we program it to give us information every 30 minutes. It also gives us information on altitude and temperature, as well as speed, and that helps us tell if the bird is in flight or stationary when we're on a computer, so that we can tell, are they actually utilizing the habitat at that time or not. We trap the birds using snare lines, and these do not harm the bird in any way. Just wanted to put that out there. We attach the GPS tag using a backpack harness technique. So basically ribbon is looped around the bird's legs and then secured to the tag. We also take some other measurements of their body, and then we always make sure the bird is well and able to move around properly before releasing it. So oftentimes we'll have a pop-up hamper that we can put the bird in and kind of observe them walking and flying before releasing them. And we've never had any issues. So I wanted to just touch on what we can do with the data, since it is a lot of data and it's very high tech. So there's a lot that we can do with it, and it's really exciting. So we don't know the full picture of what the limiting factors are for Whimbrel until we get this data, right? So with this data, we can discover sites of importance to them during all different times of their life, including breeding, wintering, and migratory periods. We can also identify threats that they face through mortality events. And we can also use the altitude data to understand how much of a threat things like offshore wind farms might be to them. And so that's just a little bit of what we can glean from these tags, and almost all of that has to do with conservation of the bird. Now in Texas, we're primarily using this data to learn more about their habitat needs during stopover. We get very frequent locations, so that allows us to follow the birds around in real time during stopover. And so that's something that's unique to other kind of tracking projects. So we follow the birds around in real time, and we're able to collect data on what they're eating, how many other Whimbrel and shorebirds are using the same field as our tagged bird, and we can then capture information on things like water level and vegetation data as well. And plus, it's a lot of fun kind of trying to recite your one tagged Whimbrel in a field of 500 of them. It's pretty hard. And so this is what those points would look like while the birds are still on the staging grounds. So this is the area east of Galveston Bay, and each different color is a different individual bird. And the big takeaway here is that the birds are not evenly distributed across the landscape, which is most evident in that zoomed out picture in the corner. The birds are definitely selecting for some feature on the landscape, and we're pretty sure we've honed in on what that feature is, so we'll talk about that next. So by following the birds around in real time during the day, we realize that the birds are very dispersed across agricultural fields. And so for a foraging Whimbrel at a stopover site, they want an area free of shrubs or trees where predators can hide, a soft ground that they can probe into, that can be anywhere from just muddy to several inches of water, and an abundant invertebrate population in the soil that they can feed on. Now, rice production entails flooding fields, and decaying rice plants feed a healthy population of invertebrates, including crawfish. So crawfish and rice production go hand in hand in that way. And it just so happens that in most years, the timing of rice production, in this area at least, does line up really closely with spring Whimbrel migration. So they're able to take advantage of the moist soil, the invertebrate population, and be able to rest and refuel. And this is just some more of what we found by following the birds around. Some impressive numbers here. So in 2022, over the course of 4 days, we saw 4,300 Whimbrels. So that number is just staggering when you're used to just seeing 1 or 2 Whimbrel on the coast in Texas at a time. And in just one field, we observed 2,000 Whimbrel. So imagine that, because these fields are not that big. In that same field, there were 22 shorebird species, and over the course of the 2 to 3 weeks we were there for field work, I'd say we had somewhere on the order of 26 to 28 shorebird species. And crawfish was the main food item that they were consuming. And then I think I mentioned this before, but typically the birds are staying for about 1 month here. And the point of staying here for 1 month is, again, to get fat reserves up and be able to then venture further north to the breeding grounds. So that's what the Whimbrel were doing during the day, but at night they fly to coastal wetlands to roost together. These are typically open wetlands with no brush or trees in sight, and the water depth is about 1/2 inch to 4 inches. So a bit narrower window of habitat that they need for nighttime. In 2022, a large roost on public land was used by most of the birds. So we had a single site where all of the birds from the surrounding area would fly into each evening and then out of each morning. So we used this opportunity to estimate how many Whimbrel were using this area, which was the last piece of the puzzle to come up with a population estimate. And so during the peak migration, we counted 9,200 birds in one evening. And so that information, with that information, we believe there are between 13 and 15,000 Whimbrel that stop over in this crawfish belt, I'll call it, between East Texas and Louisiana. So huge numbers. and that actually represents about a quarter of the entire population. Now, 2023 was a wet year versus the dry year of 2022. So the birds did something different. That large roost that they used in 2022 was too deep for them to utilize. So they were forced to disperse to smaller wetlands. They also went to the coast and some small islands to spend the night. So last year I went to as many of those roost sites as I could the morning after they were used to collect information on water depth. And this is just a look at kind of their movements. This kind of shows them using this roost. So the roost is in that kind of lower portion of the map, and you can see all of the lines kind of funnel there. And then there's also another roost off to the right, but you can see they're all funneling in day after day to get to this roost and then leave the next day. Kind of a mess, but also kind of interesting to look at. And then these are some photos from our evening roost count. So this was maybe some of the most exciting work that we did. It was really fun to count these birds. You can see us standing on top of the vehicles here, not just because we had a better vantage point up there, but also because the mosquitoes were much better just a few feet up off the ground. And like I said, counting the birds as they fly into the roost is really exciting, but it's also challenging because there's so many flying over at one time that it can be easy to miss a group. But we figured out with multiple people, we could communicate about who was counting which group, and we kind of honed in on the best protocol to get as accurate of a count as we could. And then you can see the birds kind of flying in V formation here on the right. That's kind of what we were seeing, just line after line of birds coming in over the course of, I'd say, about 45 minutes maybe. So really exciting to see that happen. You just have to deal with the mosquitoes. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a few maps. I'm not going to get into the weeds too much here, but these maps show the difference between the 2 years for nocturnal locations. So this is at night. So in 2022 on the left here, you can see the birds were piling into just a few different roosts. Whereas in 2023, they were much more spread out. They were going north of I-10 and even across Galveston Bay. And you can see our sample size of locations is different, but not so different as to cause this, huge dispersal. It's due to it being a wetter environment. This is a look at those same locations with habitat type on the map. So 2022, nearly 3/4 of locations at night were in open water, which just means very shallow sheet water. And the remainder are fields related to rice production. And I apologize, I'm still working through the 2023 data, so I don't have a breakdown of habitat just yet. I'm hoping to get a more accurate habitat layer as well to work with. But for this presentation, we will kind of run through the 2022 numbers. And then if we zoom into that open water area that made up the majority of locations, you can just see a little bit better how they're really piling into these shallow water areas. And these areas are surrounded by marsh and really no trees anywhere in sight for miles. It's also interesting to look at nocturnal location in terms of land ownership. You can see that the majority of nighttime locations were on public land, but that gets flipped on its head when we look at daytime locations. So switching gears to looking at daytime locations during the same year, we see that the Whimbrel were almost exclusively using private land. So, public land represents the National Wildlife Refuge. Private land essentially represents the rice farms. So I think that this is a really good example of how a mix of private and public land with their different land management can really benefit wildlife. Now this is a comparison of daytime locations for both years. You can see that 2022 rice was by far the most used habitat type. But in 2023, the points are much more spread out, both spatially and in a wider variety of habitats, again, due to it being wetter. And just a little bit more information on the data that we've collected. We now have data from spring of 2022 all the way till now. And now whenever a tag bird arrives in South America in the fall, they go offline until they come back to Texas. And at that time, we'll get a huge data dump. And this is because the tags use cell towers to transmit the data. And the cell towers are different between North and South America. So huge bummer for us, but that is why they go offline. Now we have had 6 birds come back into North America, giving us the full life cycle so that we get the whole loop for those 6 birds, which is really neat. We can see where they wintered and all of their movements during the winter, and see them come back up through Texas as well, and see where they landed on the coast of Texas. So that's something else I'm interested in looking at, is where do the birds land before making their way up to Anahuac area. And also, we don't know exactly what the fate of those birds that we've lost touch with is. We can't say that they died on the wintering grounds necessarily. It's very possible that the bird was hanging out in a dark mangrove forest all winter, like you saw the picture, and the tag solar panel just didn't get enough light to keep it charged up. It's also possible that the birds are taking a year off from breeding. It seems unlikely, but we just don't know. Maybe those birds will eventually come back up and we'll see what they were up to during that time. So these are the tracks from Whimbrel after they leave the Texas stopover site. I thought you'd be interested in seeing that. They travel along the mid-continent for the most part, beelining it to the breeding grounds. In the spring, the birds are always moving a bit quicker because they have an agenda. A couple birds did wander a bit. You can see sort of the black line and that green line, they wandered. And we believe that those birds are likely subadults and they just weren't serious about breeding yet. And then once they arrive in the Mackenzie River Delta area, they'll start their breeding activities. But not all of the birds made it to the breeding grounds. We have 5 known mortalities out of the 38 total birds that we've tagged. And, you know, it's pretty disappointing when this happens, but there is a bright side. We get to retrieve the tags and try to find clues at the kill site of how the bird may have died, which, you know, is still informative to us about these birds. And based on what we saw when we picked up these tags, we believe peregrines are responsible for most of them. You know, can't blame them. They need a meal too. But there was some pretty good evidence that they were peregrines based on where they were found. And once we retrieve the tags, again, we can reuse them so that they don't go to waste, put them on another Whimbrel, and all is good. These are the movements on the breeding grounds. I just think this is really fascinating to look at. So each color is a different individual bird. You can see the birds are only up here for about a month or 2 max, and they're very focused on their movement. So you see the line coming into their territory and out of their territory. And within that time frame, they're really not moving much. So during this time, you know, their energy is focused on nesting and feeding young. So it makes sense that they're not wandering too much. Now, this next slide here is actually a video that I want to share with you. One of our senior shorebird scientists, Shiloh, took this video of a Whimbrel nest, and it's just really neat to see a Whimbrel so up close and personal on the breeding grounds. Not many people get to see this, so I thought I would share it with you. So I'll be quiet now and let you watch this. love that little shimmy at the end too. It's so cute. Okay, so after what I imagine is an exhausting breeding season for these birds, they need to replenish their fat reserves once again. So they head to Hudson Bay to do that. They'll then move east to the coast, the East Coast. And during this part of their life, they are eating fiddler crabs and berries. And then once October and November rolls around, they're going to be thinking about jumping off that eastern seaboard and flying directly to South America. Some of the birds will kind of venture south along the coast until they're ready, but for the most part, the birds do jump off that north of New England area. Aside from putting tags on birds using the Texas coast, we're also putting tags on breeders in the Arctic to learn more about their breeding ecology. I'll actually be headed up to the Arctic this summer for the first time to help out with that work, so I'm super excited for that. And then we are also tagging juveniles in Cape Cod, or my colleagues rather are tagging juveniles in Cape Cod to look at subadult movement and survival, because that's another kind of data gap that we have for Whimbrel. But now, because of the flexibility of the programming and how long these tags can last, a tag that we put out in Texas, for example, is also giving us data on the breeding grounds, like I showed you those movements on the nests, and also potentially in Cape Cod. So we're getting all of this information just from tagging the bird in one location, which is really neat. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to mention a new project that we're working on with Texas Water Trade and Galveston Bay Foundation in that same area that we've been talking about, and actually the same properties where we've been trapping the Whimbrel. And we hope that this project will benefit Whimbrel. So these two groups are allocating water at no cost to landowners, and they're doing it in a way that will benefit shorebirds. So this will be done each spring and fall during peak shorebird season, and it will be done at the right depth to be functional for shorebirds. So they started allocating water this last fall as a pilot season, and I got out there to survey the birds before, during, and after the flooding. And it ended up being really successful. Water was put out on about 2,800 acres of land. And we did that over 5 private properties and 2 units of Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge. It was a severe drought throughout that entire summer and fall, so everything was truly bone dry. So once we put the water out there, the shorebirds were really, really happy. And so I compiled that data from the surveys, and these are the results. I surveyed all birds present since I was there. I might as well have. But you can see shorebirds at the bottom. It's pretty clear that the bird groups that are associated with water, so, you know, ducks, terns, waterbirds, and shorebirds, they were all much more abundant in the flooded fields, which may seem obvious, but it's really good to be able to show that through data and show that to the people that funded the water so that we can keep doing it. And then I also looked at shorebird density over the survey period for that water allocation project. And you can see that there are 2 peaks here. Now, we can't really infer too much from this data because it is literally 1 season in 1 year. And so we need more data to infer anything. But I believe these 2 peaks could represent the adult shorebirds coming through, followed by the juveniles, which is common kind of chronology of migration within shorebirds. And then this is just kind of a visual representation of what some of those fields look like for this water allocation project. So the top left is a fallow field that was flooded. You can see it's bone dry and then beautiful shallow sheen of water in the right hand photo. On the bottom we have a rice field. So on the left, that's a rice field before harvest, and then you can see it was hayed. and then the water was delivered, and you can see there's a nice gradient of water depth, which is great for shorebirds. So they've got some deeper pools, some of the longer legged shorebirds like black-necked stilts would like, and then it gets shallower and shallower, which things like semi-palmated plovers can utilize. Okay, so I also wanted to briefly mention the International Shorebird Survey. I'll use this as kind of a plug to recruit volunteers. We are always looking for volunteers. So this is a citizen science tool that was organized in the 70s with the idea of having regular long-term counts to fill in shorebird data gaps. And data gaps are actually huge, given that a lot of birders tend to ignore the shorebirds because maybe they're intimidated by the identification or they don't like them, whatever the reason, they are kind of ignored by birders in general. So we end up with a lot of X number of peeps in eBird, which is not helpful, and you can't analyze that. So this graph that I showed earlier comes from a paper that used ISS data exclusively. So that data that was in that published manuscript was collected by citizen scientists over the years. So the data is used, it doesn't just sit in a database somewhere. John mentioned this already, but Travis Audubon has been really a big contributor to the ISS, which we're extremely grateful for. Yeah, I had the opportunity to join John and the others at the August Hornsby Bend trip, which was great. I had a great time meeting those folks and seeing all the black-necked stilt babies run around. So if you are interested in helping out with the International Shorebird Survey, please contact me. I'm sure you are welcome to join the Hornsby Bend group if you're a beginner, or if you have an idea of a site you'd already like to cover that's near your house, or somewhere that you frequent a lot. You know, I can definitely help you get started with that. I can give you the protocol. It's really, really easy. We make it so that people can just, you know, contribute the data during their normal birding routines. Okay, so that's all. I just wanted to, you know, thank our funders, the Knobloch Family Foundation, who we couldn't do this work without. And of course, there's a lot of other people that have contributed, the private landowners, Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge staff, and others. So thank you to everyone who's helped out with this. And, you know, I'm happy to take any questions you might have on this. And with that, I will turn it over to John.
Yeah, thanks. This is great, Sam. I'm going to start with one question just to let people know, or just provide a little bit of information on the size of the tags that you're using, and do the birds feel it? Does it in any way inhibit their flight? If you could talk about that for a second.
Yeah. So the tags are 9 grams, and these are, we've come a long way with technology. So for many years there were no tags small enough to be able to put on birds of this size, and that's another reason why we chose Whimbrel, is we're able to put these very accurate high-tech tags on them because they are larger. And so these tags are weighted on the center of their back, and they really can't feel them as far as we can tell. And we watch them fly off after placing it on them. We're very meticulous with every feather must be in the right spot before letting them go. And that's important because we know that if a peregrine's chasing a Whimbrel, any minute change of direction, can be affected by this tag. So we want to make sure it's put on properly.
So we have a question. After the tracking time is over, how is the tracker released from the bird, or is it?
Okay, yeah, good question. So these birds are on, or excuse me, the tags are on the birds for life. So that's another reason why we need to make sure that this tag is perfectly placed on them. And so, yeah, they stay on the bird. They're not the type that fall off with molt.
Okay. Do you have any expectation as to how long they might generate data?
You know what? I don't. I'm really hopeful that we'll get a few years out of it. Those older tags, which were low tech tags, they lasted about 4 years. And so I'm really hopeful that these will last at least 4 years. In which case we can get, see patterns over time and see site fidelity for migratory stopover sites, for the breeding grounds, things like that. But that is TBD, I guess, right now.
Yeah, here's a good one. Is there anything about the Whimbrels feeding on crawfish in the rice fields that upsets the rice farmers?
No, actually, I've actually had a rice farmer, when he found out they were eating crawfish, jokingly say, well, maybe I should switch over to crawfish farming, which we probably, discourage. Because a crawfish farm doesn't have the same benefits to a Whimbrel because it's much deeper water. But no, actually the rice farmers have all been really friendly to us and to the birds. They're all very curious, about what we're doing, and none of them seem to have any negative feelings towards Whimbrel specifically. They might, have some ill feelings toward the black-bellied whistling ducks who might eat the seed, but not the Whimbrel.
Good. May turn a few of them into burgers.
I think so. Yeah, I think at least, all the farmers definitely know these birds. They've been around them their whole life as they're farming, and so they do appreciate them. And I think us being out there helps them recognize the importance of the bird.
That's great. So how or will the issues of limited water resources and associated cutbacks in water for rice farming impact the foraging sites on the coast?
That's a really good question. Very good. Yeah, so that is one of the reasons that we're doing this water allocation project. So the water that we are allocating is called firm water, and so we're able to purchase it even when it's not available for agricultural purposes. So it can be used for the environment, basically. And so the farmers really like this water because they can get it for free and during a time when it's not available to other farmers.
Okay, next question. Do you target putting the tags on males or females, or does it matter?
We do not target them. The only thing we target is that the bird has to meet a certain weight expectation. So we need to make sure that the bird is the right weight so that tag won't affect it as it's flying. So early on in the tagging process, that can be difficult. We might have to turn some birds away because they're still skinny once they've just first arrived. But later on, it's almost pretty much every Whimbrel we catch, we can put a tag on. But in terms of male female, we don't target that. And actually the jury's still out on exactly how we can tell male and species apart, even in the hand. So we believe that things like bill length and other body measurements can tell us the difference, but we're not targeting sex.
Yeah, it's a question about stopovers. How long does it take a Whimbrel to fly from New England to South America, and do they stop?
That's a really good one. Yeah, I can't tell you offhand exactly how many hours or days that takes, but it does depend obviously on if they have a tailwind, a headwind. We've had birds experience hurricanes, so they'll actually fly all the way out into the middle of the Atlantic, experience a hurricane, and fly back to shore and stay there for a week or so to kind of replenish and rest up. So that flight is you're probably looking at a 48-hour flight, I would think, at least, to get across, depending on what kind of winds they're traveling with.
Okay, what is the source of the water used in the allocation project?
Yeah, so the source is the Trinity River. We use the canal system, so the River Authority has been, really helpful in getting us water through the canal system.
Okay. Does Manomet work with the Anahuac Refuge to manage the water levels there?
Yeah, we do. We work pretty closely with them. They helped us get out on the marsh on an airboat to measure water levels so that we could then give them that information back to say, hey, this is, the ideal roost water level for them so that they can then manage their water levels. And they were part of that water allocation project. And so, yeah, we work hand in hand with them and definitely trying to get them to, manage for shorebirds for sure.
And the last question in the chat, and we'll see who might know the answer to this. Have Whimbrels ever been spotted at Hornsby Bend on their way to the Gulf?
Ooh, good question.
Yeah.
So on their way to the Gulf, I would say no, because generally we won't see Whimbrel in the fall here. But the time that you might see them would be in the spring on their northbound journey. I would imagine no. I have not looked at eBird recently to see. I know, didn't you have a long-billed curlew show up there this last year? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Do you know, John?
I don't know. If anybody does know the answer, just pop it in the chat because I think we'd be curious. I find it hard to believe that a Whimbrel hasn't been seen there, but but it's certainly not a common occurrence.
Yeah, and I would just also add that from if it's a Whimbrel using this stopover site that I've been talking about, they probably aren't going to stop at Hornsby Bend because they'll have enough fuel to just jump over and not stop until they get to, say, Montana or one of those places. So
got it. Yeah, one last question came in. Do the stopovers in Anahuac return through the Atlantic Ocean? And what are the round trips?
can you repeat that question one more time?
Yeah, no, do the stopovers in Anahuac, I'm assuming the person means the stopover birds, do they return through the Atlantic Ocean, or what are the circular pathways?
Right. So no, they'll only go through Texas in the spring. So they're going north through Texas in the spring, and then in the fall they'll go through the Atlantic Ocean route. So this stopover site will only be used once a year.
Got it. And Jane Tillman has come through for us. There were 14 Whimbrels at Windy Point last May. Windy Point, for those of you who don't know, is on Lake Travis. It's a great spot to see shorebirds flying over. So thanks, Jane. And she's on eBird, 3 at Hornsby in 2010.
All right, great.
Will you share once again how best to reach out if we're interested in helping with the count surveys?
Yes, absolutely. So my email address is swolfe@manomet.org. And I'm sure I can share that in the chat too. That'll be easier for everyone.
Good. And you can also do the monthly, come out to Hornsby Bend for the monthly surveys. There are always folks there who'd be willing to talk shorebirds with you. And, if you're not familiar with them or intimidated by them, how to tell the difference, there's, we learn from each other. So you don't need to be an expert. And just another plug for the Hornsby Bend survey if you prefer to do something else other than shorebirds. There multiple routes that are covered, so all of the habitats. And you can find information on the Hornsby Bend website, and we have it on the Travis Audubon website as well. So lots of comments in the chat about how terrific the presentation was, and thank you again for spending time with us. Kaylee, I'll turn it back to you.
All right. Yes, thank you very much, Sam, for a wonderful presentation. And we will see you all next month in person for our February speaker series. It'll be with Dr. David Hillis from UT. He's will be talking about his new book. So thank you all so much and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.